Hi, everybody. My name is Jacob Altholtz. I am the, I think, Vice Chair of Advocacy for GSACEP. It's nice to see you all, and I'm hoping that you'll get a lot out of this. Today, we wanted to talk about the inside scoop on the ACEP Council. So there's a lot of questions about how advocacy works within GSACEP, but also just ACEP in general. And so we were hoping we could get you an overview of what that looks like and then how we as GSACEP work inside that. Briefly as an overview, we're going to talk about who GSACEP is in the context of the ACEP structure, GSACEP's priorities and delegation, and then of course your role potentially within GSACEP. So first noting, ACEP has multiple different interacting parts. There's the board of directors. There's that group there that's currently the current board. There's ACEP Council, which is what we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about. There's chapters and sections, which are different, of which we are, GSACEP is one of the chapters, as it were. And then we, of course, have the staff. The board of directors, when we talk about the function of ACEP, is the group that really is tasked with overseeing the quote unquote, they say day to day of the organization, meaning that they are the ones that have oversight and then guide and represent the entire organization. So when ACEP comes out and makes a statement, for example, or if ACEP quote unquote as a group meets with somebody, it's usually somebody either from the board of directors with official party line being that the president is elected to be the voice of the organization and association. However, the council then is the group that guides and tries to dictate some of the agenda that goes on. So the council itself, ACEP Council, has the specific investment that you can see below, which is that it ultimately is the group that comes together once a year and instructs and advises the board of directors on any matter that they deem necessary. So there's this little kind of wording down here that says that regarding any matter of importance to the college by means of bylaws and non-bylaws resolutions. And what that means is that every year the council, which this is a picture of, comes together and decides things together and votes on things that can determine how ACEP is going to move forward. Some of this is internal, but a lot of it also has to do with how we're going to advocate. How does ACEP Council works? For those of you that are familiar with parliamentary procedure, this is the framework we use to make decisions. So parliamentary procedure is this, I think the place that most people are familiar with parliamentary procedure is the parliamentary procedure pyramid, which is basically your out of order and the order of precedence of motions. So making motions and having to second a motion and having to vote on these motions are all components of parliamentary procedure. The purpose of this is actually not to be tedious. It's explicitly to be equitable and so that everybody has a place that they can be heard and feel fairly understood, while at the same time making sure that we do this with as little friction as possible. So tenets of parliamentary procedure are things like only debating one motion at a time. So, there's times where there's big complex questions that are being asked, but we kind of break it down into small little parts just to make sure that we're all staying on the same page and that we're not overwhelming ourselves by trying to answer this giant concern all at the same time. Members represent delegation. Members and delegations can represent their constituencies, and those are the groups that can submit things to council. So, you get a fair number of different perspectives, ultimately being voted on all at the same time. This most recent upcoming example will be in Salt Lake City during ACEP Scientific Assembly just prior. What's a resolution is inevitably the next question that comes up. It's usually a very short statement that dictates something that the organization is going to believe or do. So I just pulled a random example that I thought was easy to understand from this year's ACEP Council. This is a resolution that Pennsylvania has submitted that says, and you always know what a resolution is by the intro of this giant all capital resolved, comma, that says something. And then this context, it says, ACEP identify and work with other key stakeholders to develop a public education campaign targeted to help patients better understand which complaints are appropriate for an urgent care center versus emergency department. Basically, what's going to happen with this is that we put this through a bunch of review processes. People are going to be able to give their input from different delegations. There's a group of people that are going to be able to edit this if they think that there's stuff that needs to get changed and added back, and then eventually it gets put back to the entire ACEP Council for us to vote on it. Essentially, what this would do is that ACEP Council passes this, and then it now is up to the board of directors to take this direction that the council has given ACEP and do something with it. So it says work with other key stakeholders. That could be whoever they deem public. That could be relevant. That could be the government. That could be the public. That could be anybody really in other organizations. That could be the AMA. It could be just members of ACEP. And so the idea being that they would spend time and energy on doing this. And so the council is the group that can dictate this priority. Chapters, such as GSACEP, and sections, such as the Young Physician sections, receive representation within the ACEP Council. So we have 7 seats, Justine? How many seats do we have?
11.
Oh, 11, that's
Large
right.
chapter.
Oh, that's right, because we have the 6 plus the 4. Okay, yeah, sorry. We have 11 spots in ACEP Council. This is dictated by how many members we have, essentially. There's a proportionality that goes into this. Chapters are meant to be a subsidiary of the organization insofar as they are a subsection, usually geographically based. And so when we're talking about the vast majority of the chapters, they are states. So California ACEP, Colorado ACEP, Nevada ACEP. But we are unique in that we are across all of these areas with the intention of encapsulating all of those that are federal workers or military. The idea behind this being that we get moved a lot. We also have the same practice environment as each other in a lot of ways, just not depending on where we live, as I would say. And so we have both the awesome privilege and the confusing sometimes place to be where we have members across the entire organization. And so we are really unique in that way. We are also a very organized chapter, as it were. There's also something called sections. The sections are meant to be also groups within ACEP, but they are meant to be groups that have special interests. So there's a toxicology section. There's a emergency medical services section, and then there's also, the young physicians section. I think the young physicians section is one that many ACEP members are going to be familiar with because you automatically get put on it depending on how many years you've been outside of residency, for example. The sections tend to get 1 vote or so, and they also have an alternate, but then the chapters have the proportionality like we mentioned. So we have 11 people, and we'll talk about our delegation in a second. When they say that the board of directors deals the day-to-day, I will rightfully acknowledge that the staff are actually the ones that do the day-to-day. And so there's a whole staff of ACEP that does a lot of amazing things. ACEP is organized out of multiple cities, including Dallas as headquarters, but also they have a DC office. And so I purposely picked a picture of the DC staff because these are the people who execute the advocacy. So when ACEP decides to, have a position on something and they want that position to be executed on in the government, particularly the federal government, then this is the group that gets together and decides how they think they should go about doing that. And these people obviously care a whole hell of a lot about what we do at ACEP Council because this is what dictates their agenda for the next year, sorry. ACEP Council then is where GSACEP advocates to the college. So when we have something that we think we need the college to understand, or if there is something the college is doing that they need our perspective on, then we make sure that we bring that to to ACEP Council. We are able to do the same things everybody else would, which would be to consider policy and give our unique perspective on it, to submit policy. And then also, this is honestly a really great time that people interact with other sections and chapters. We as states, for example, I'll just say, like, I sat with the Nevada delegation because I was in Nevada and I was in the military at the time, and then I've always been, close to the GSACEP delegation. So there's a whole lot of overlap that happens there where there's a lot of networking. So I was stationed there in Nevada. But now that I'm in Colorado, then I still interact with GSACEP. And so, this is a great time for people to overlap and to meet each other and work with the constituencies that they have. Because also special GSACEP is that you can belong to 2 different chapters, because you can belong to your state one and you can belong to your GSACEP, and you can do things with either of them. And it's kind of an awesome privilege that we get. This is a picture of our delegation. Our fearless leader, Justine Stremick, who is here as our president this year. The default, as it were, or ex officio members of our delegation are those who are within the officer group. So the president, president-elect, and then what's referred to as the immediate past president, and then the secretary and treasurer of GSACEP. Those are our 4 individuals that you can see up there. And then we are somewhat unique in that we also elect our counselors. A lot of chapters do this, but we have a special, basically, election cycle every year that happens at the Government Services Symposium is when it finishes up, and our counselors are elected. So these are our current 6 other counselors that we have. And then we also have other methods of getting people counselor positions depending on what's going on. We also have alternate counselors. So say that these 11 folks go up to the meeting and then one of them has to step out for, some other reason, then we have alternates that can come step in and represent GSACEP. And if you don't notice by uniform, one thing that's really cool about our delegation is that we have somebody from every branch. We also have some retired folks. We also have people who work for the VA. And so we have a truly diverse group of people that are also spread across the country, and it's really awesome. As a delegation, generally speaking, our priority is, protecting those in our unique position. Like we have a lot of pressures on our lives that are not the same as everybody else's. So, I drew this Venn diagram very quickly, but it's something that I'm sure we're all familiar with in this role, which is this overlap of physicianhood plus being in the military and or being a federal servant, and also just being a human being that's trying to make all this stuff work on the side. And so really good examples include, membership protections or considerations for those deployed. So for example, there's certain requirements to being a member of GSACEP, or sorry, of ACEP or organizations and associations like this. And often those considerations don't, often things like deployments or those kinds of considerations don't take into account these kinds of findings. And so what we are able to do is make sure that there are, if needed, things like special carve outs. There are some policies like that. ACEP has also been generous enough to have a military discount, for example, things like that. And then also supporting things like often relocating, like GSACEP itself in some ways is a response to that because we can't necessarily belong to the state chapters when we're all moving around and getting other stuff done. Other things that we do ensure that our expertise is heard when questions around the federal government arise. A lot of the time, there are things that overlap more than you might expect with the military in advocacy because people will make resolutions or make arguments that are related to both how the Department of Defense is conducting its strategy or how the federal government is pursuing certain I don't know, keeping it broad, just like other strategies. And so then there's times where we, as both federal workers and military officers, can really explain or give perspective on certain issues that other people don't necessarily consider immediately. A good example of something that we bring a pretty nuanced perspective to is the APP debate. Uh, PAs, NPs, APPs in general, however you want to label them, have been, of course, a large talking point within medicine at large, certainly within emergency medicine. In emergency medicine, for example, we all want to make sure that people get the highest quality care. And so there's been many arguments around whether or not there should always be a board certified emergency medicine doctor in every ER, for example, versus a PA or NP. And so then there's often an attempt to restrict access to PAs or NPs for certain places. And I think the military in particular has a pretty nuanced view of this, understanding that we have a really good relationship with our APPs and that we have specific guidelines and guardrails around what we think our APPs should be able to do and shouldn't be able to do. And so there's many a time, for example, that smaller military bases will only have essentially an APP that staffs an ER, or that we just have really good relationships with ours. So, for example, back in Nevada, where I was at in Nellis Air Force Base, I had really great relationships with our PAs, who handled like an immense amount of work that we really appreciated. And so, blanket statements towards bans were something that we, as GSACEP, have spoken up about before, stating that we really didn't think that that was all that fair for a lot of reasons. Um, but then we also were able to educate them on what we do that works well and why it works well. For example, we do spend a lot of time educating our PAs and NPs, and so this was a really good place for us to, teach back to the other side of the emergency medicine world. GSACEP has committees. So I'm just putting this out there because this is how a lot of individuals get involved with GSACEP the first time. We have smaller groups that help us function, and essentially, going through them. Advocacy is obviously the hard hitter here. So that is the group that advises the larger ACEP group on how we should dictate priorities, what we should move towards. Michaela LaRose is here, is the chair of that. We have the Public Relations Committee, which is actually how Justine and I met. I I helped write the newsletter for a long time, and by helped I mean I did do a lot. Justine did a lot more than I did. Um, but this Public Relations Committee, of course, has a lot to do with advocacy because it's how we communicate with the larger, GSACEP membership. And so there's a lot of times where we'll write things like newsletters that update people on different things that we're doing. They are also the ones that help liaise with different groups. So GSEMRA, so EMRA has its own government services chapter. There's the GSS Conference Committee, which helps set up the Government Services Symposium. This past year it was in San Antonio. I actually don't know where next year is, and this is the banner that I found, so I pulled this one. But it is there. And the membership committee is often probably the committee that people think of the most when they interact with GSACEP, because they're the ones that do things like the resident, like reaching out and stuff like that, as well as welcome kits, and then nominating and awards, which are committees that are essentially seeking for like internal structures. Obviously, the awards being the committee that awards the government service awards that we have, and the nominating committee looking for board of directors candidates, essentially. But these all kind of feed into how GSACEP will move forward in terms of things like our delegation. You can be elected to be a counselor. So, elections are annual. It's not uncommon for people to be highly involved in some way in a committee and then get involved in other ways, but it's also not uncommon for people to kind of just jump into the counselor role if they know what they're doing and they've been to ACEP Council, or even if they haven't. Like, if they just feel like if they know enough about advocacy and if they feel like they can really represent the interests of the entire section and chapter, then it's not uncommon for people to kind of jump into that role. And so, there's plenty of information we have if you want. They're up on it's up on the website, but also part of the newsletter that we send out every year. And you can definitely join up to be part of the delegation. My last slide, I know it was kind of a quick thing, but I just want to get to questions if we had them, was to also just recommend that you choose your own adventure. What I would say when it comes to advocacy is that you don't really have to like pick one certain like track and get there. As an example, and just recognizing the irony, I've actually never sat on the GSACEP delegation, but that's because I've sat on other delegations and I've worked very, very closely alongside GSACEP pretty much the entire time. And so, this picture up on the top left is when I was part of the Nevada delegation to DC. And on the pictures on the right are of me at the AMA meetings, where I've worked with ACEP leadership to represent the American Medical Association, to represent ACEP to the American Medical Association. And through that, I was able to also represent military interests, because, those two folks that I'm showing right there, one of them is a general who was a guest, but the other one was the current president of the American Medical Association, who had served in the Navy. And so there's a lot of places where you can kind of make your way and jump around and use what you know and who you know to make sure that you represent the military's and the federal workers' needs at large. And then, of course, EMRA. EMRA is kind of where I think most people know me from. I am currently rolling off my role as speaker. But for example, on the board of directors, I am like the guy who's in the military. And so people often defer to me when it comes to these things and make sure that we represent that same group that I was talking about before in those constituencies in that place. And so just know that, like, we would love to have you on the delegation of government services, or just have any role in advocacy that we do, because it's really important that we hear from across the country, especially because we are not co-located and have so many different experiences across the branches. But the other side is to make sure that you just kind of find where your voice fits the best. And so there's a lot of places that you can go, and government services is definitely a place where you can figure out what that looks like for you. Are there any questions? I'm gonna stop sharing my screen because I don't see a reason to keep the questions up.
Greetings.
Hello.
Horace Carson, MD, Doc, is my nickname, like every other doctor in the military. I'm a retired Air Force guy. I retired in 2008. I did a lot of clinical stuff, SGH, all those kinds of jobs. Facility commander, a couple of places. And I wanted to participate just to see what kind of role I might play, because I am a member of GSA. And I just don't want to be a couch potato. I was in the ED world, if you will, way back when MOD was the dreaded medical officer of the day for military doctors, and having to write the schedules and all of that. And I don't know how much the organization does in terms of dealing with physician morale and that type of thing, to making sure that there's advocacy at the level of the chapter where a problem may arise, those kinds of things, or quality of care issues. And I found it interesting on your resolution example of educating the public on the difference between the urgent care center and the emergency room. And as we all know, the ER has always been the swinging door that they put in kitchens in America, where if it's there, you show up. Pediatrics, orthopedic, the whole gamut. And so special relationships were always developed with the specialists that fortunately through ACEP, we've been granted some things we can do now as emergency physicians.
Yeah.
Was once protected. So whatever advocacy organizations have done in that, I thank you for that. I lived in that world of the family practice stock, getting OB/GYN privileges and those kind of things. But more importantly, I just wanted to touch base with the environment that we're in with, the military. Whenever I would go to a conference as a military doc in the past, some of the civilian docs really envied the protections we have. We have a protected environment. We have a lot of protections that the civilian may not. We're not worried about the paycheck, first of all, because we're assigned as an officer or an enlisted person. And so those things are unique. So I think it's an excellent recruitment opportunity to get civilian medical students interested in emergency medicine in the military. It's just something that I just throw out there in the advocacy committee function that may be something that we can look at outreach in that regard. It's certainly become the highly respected special that it deserved to be decades ago. But this differentiation, we call it the doc in the box. You see them everywhere, springing up urgent care clinics. And in the military base, having experience, I'm just sharing experience when I was at the medical facility at Aviano, 31st Fighter Wing. As we were downsizing, closing ERs, right, with the 24-hour access and the Joint Commission requirements to have those functions, we changed the name to urgent care and various other names that weren't emergency room. And so that was kind of a unique opportunity where we were trying to govern or limit just what shows up, what we're accountable to. But that abbreviation we hear in conference, EMTALA, you show up, we will treat or at least evaluate, stabilize, et cetera. So there's some challenges for the civilian side of the world in this way. We're in our military operations, that's pretty well organized, I think, and understood, where we have docs with there's new terminology for triaging certain patients to the NP or the PA. So all of those kinds of things helps the military deal with this population. I suppose that's probably being duplicated out there in the civilian world as well, but that's just something that I'm interested in, because there are a lot of people that don't have insurance out there in the real world, and they're going to be coming to our ERs with their cough. And so saying you should be over down there at the Patient First on 16th Street or what have you, that can be a political challenge. But I don't think we're turning anybody away. I'm pretty sure we aren't. I'm doing a lot of talking. Sorry about that. I'm just enjoying listening to you and learning what GSACEP and how it's put together. I've read it in emails, but this gives me an opportunity to maybe make a difference somewhere.
I'll tell you that with your position, what you were describing is you are in a unique position that is not uncommon in GSACEP, and what I would say is often also very valued. That it's funny, that one resolution that got you thinking that much, I'll tell you there's 85 of them this year. So like that is one resolution of 85. And so there is a whole system in which we break them down so that not everybody gets overwhelmed by them. And many of them some of them are easier going. There's at least 25 or so that people usually don't even vote on because we all agree. But what I'm getting at is like those kinds of thoughts are things that I think GSACEP does really well. Another example that comes to mind, especially since you mentioned EMTALA, is that, a person who helped get that legislation passed, when I think about it, is Art Kellerman, who was the dean of the Uniformed Services University for a long time. And so he went and advocated to Congress and got EMTALA advocated across the finish line, essentially, alongside a lot of other doctors. No longer, he works for a different system now, but you know, having individuals like that across the system, and then also having individuals who have that level of experience are extremely helpful and not uncommon. And also have many places that you can help advocate for within GSACEP. Justine, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple things. Horace, thank you so much for being here and for your comments. Just some things to kind of piggyback off on for anyone that is listening later on. There are ways for you to get involved. I sent out a message on Engaged that most of you, if you're a GSACEP member, should have received, but it's got all of the resolutions on there. And you are able to either give asynchronous testimony yourself or reach out to us, let us know your thoughts so that we can represent your views on council. And that can either be a direct response to the message I sent out, an email to myself or Michelle, or we have an anonymous form if there are concerns about maybe attaching your name to your thoughts, called the Member's Voice, that you can send, and we can kind of get your thoughts on things and incorporate those opinions and things as we go forward and discuss.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's interesting, Jacob, you brought up Art Kellerman. Wasn't he chair of the USU for a while?
Oh, he was dean. He was the dean.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's why I brought him up, is because that's how I learned about a lot of this, actually, is through him. And then Jillian Schmitz. Oh, I should mention Jillian Schmitz. That's a great example, actually. Jillian Schmitz was the president of ACEP, and she's in the government services chapter. Should have mentioned that one. That was probably the most recent, but yeah. Oh, and Chris. Geez, Chris too. Never thinking about it. There's like so many of us.
Dr. Suter and Linda Lawrence.
Yeah. Yes.
We've got some.
Has a long history of leadership within the National College. So. Well, thank you. Justine, any closing comments?
No, just feel free, anyone, to reach out with any questions, concerns, thoughts about the resolutions. If you want to get more involved in GSACEP, Jacob outlined some of the committees. Those are great ways to get involved, and we would be happy to have any of you join us.
Sure.
And thank you, Jacob, for putting that together. I really appreciate you giving that presentation.
Well
Thanks,
done.
everybody. Hope to see you.
This was recorded, and we will have it posted up on the website probably in the next week or so. So thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jacob Altholtz. I am